The beginning of Herobrine, pre-sequel. Trilon and the Doctor are plotting to end the Time War once and for all by destroying Gallifrey. Herobrine was, and still is, an important commander in the Dalek armies. He had also captured Trilon's mother while the Daleks were leading an assault on Arcadia, the second most important city on the planet. In order to kill Herobrine, Trilon shot through his mother. The Doctor and Trilon cremated her and left. Herobrine survived, in secret. Trilon stole the moment, gave it to the Doctor, then immediately left Gallifrey. The Doctor then destroyed Gallifrey. Trilon later regenerated, giving Herobrine time to taint Trilon's memories with his magic. Herobrine created a false life within Trilon's head, causing Trilon to believe he was human. Herobrine also did the same to the Redeemer. Trilon and the Redeemer then believed their names were Davy and Ted. This marked an end to the beginning of Herobrine movie. Herobrine's Wrath. Two men named Davy and Ted woke up to find themselves shipwrecked on an abandoned island. They desperately scour the island and mine materials to survive. Strange things start happening. Then Davy mentions an ancient legend called Herobrine that he believes could possibly be responsible for the strange happenings. Herobrine then realizes that his efforts to make Davy, whose real name is Trilon, to forget his own identity and forget about the Time War have failed. Herobrine also discovers that the Redeemer, also known as Ted, has a faded memory of Herobrine, just like Trilon. Herobrine starts giving them warnings, causing Trilon and the Redeemer to fear Herobrine. Trilon eventually builds a ship to escape the island with the Redeemer, only to find another man has shown up on shore. It was an older man, whose name was Ralph. They became friends and set off to find land. Ralph wakes up to find his age has decreased into his younger years. Everyone was surprised, but they eventually find that it was Herobrine's doing, and it was of no current danger to them at the time. They find land and discover an ancient prophecy that 3 people would slay one of the last dragons known to exist by the universe, known as the Ender Dragon. They travel to the End and destroy the dragon. The dragon was Herobrine's pet, and acted as a firewall, if you will, to prevent Trilon and the Redeemer from remembering who they really were. When the dragon died, their memories started coming back to them gradually. Trilon, now realizing his identity, proceeded to realize that Herobrine has returned and needs to be stopped. On a side note, Ted would eventually recover his memories later in the series. Trilon finds the Doctor's TARDIS in the end, not knowing why or how it ended up there. He takes it, repairs it, and sets off for the Redeemer, and Ralph. They begin to track down Herobrine, hoping to find him and end his reign of terror throughout the cosmos. They eventually find and, quote-unquote, kill him, but in the process, Trilon sacrifices himself in order to do so. The Doctor assisted the 3 in their endeavors around the end of these events, and these such events brought an end to Herobrine's wrath. Herobrine's Reckoning. The Doctor eventually tracks down the scrolls of the Master in order to resurrect Trilon. He resurrects him, only to find Trilon has deemed the universe unworthy to live in peace, based on past events that had happened universally throughout Trilon's life, and due to Trilon's truly evil soul. During the Time War, Trilon was known for his brutality, hence his name being the Destroyer, but eventually became good again, only to go back to his evil ways in Herobrine's Reckoning. Trilon takes the future version of the Doctor's TARDIS and leaves. The Doctor leaves in his TARDIS, but the present-day version of it. In other words, the same TARDIS, but different time zones. Trilon teams up with the Decepticons and destroys billions upon billions of planets within the universe. On a side note, this is the reason for Trilon being practically immortal. The Time Lords, as a punishment, granted Trilon infinite lives, so Trilon would be forced to watch as the universe passed by and all those he loved perish. Trilon, now calling himself the Destroyer once again, and the Decepticons have one final target, Earth. Right before he gives the order to destroy Earth, a new ally, the Surgeon, asks why they are truly doing this. The Destroyer asks for him to explain. The Surgeon says that the people of Earth would never deserve this fate, because they really had no part in what the universe has done. Trilon eventually agrees, but a few members of his team disagree. Eventually, the whole team turns to good once again, and abandons the Decepticons, and then proceeds to team with the Autobots. Later on, Trilon and the Doctor meet at Notch's fortress, where Trilon then explains to the Doctor that he has changed and now fights for good. The Doctor and Trilon eventually locate their sister, the Mistress, also known as the Master in her previous lives, in an effort to gain her help in the wars to come. Afterwards, the team tries to assault Herobrine's now damaged fortress. On a side note, it was damaged on the assault that took place in Herobrine's wrath, only to find that a Dalek ship was waiting for their arrival. Herobrine and the Daleks put the entire team into holding cells for nearly 300 years. Pure evil had then spread across the universe in these 300 years, and Herobrine was so close to his goal of ruling all of the universe. Right before Herobrine decided they were kept as prisoners for long enough, meaning he was finally going to put an end to their lives, the Time Lords of the team, Trilon, the Doctor, and the Mistress, had mentally overridden the locks of the cells and escaped them. They broke out, injured Herobrine, and recovered their TARDISes. They fled in order to prepare for the final battle with Herobrine. Trilon left on his own during the night before they were going to assault Herobrine's fortress, and planned to kill Herobrine himself. The team discovers this not long after and arrives at the fortress only to find that Trilon has deadlocked the throne room door in the effort to keep the team out long enough for him to deal with Herobrine. Earlier in the series, Herobrine imprisoned a past version of a long-lost companion of the Doctor's, known as Rose. Trilon destroyed Herobrine's physical body with the Sword of Never-Ending Holiness, forged in Rahu Sangar, Notch's kingdom, and then believed that Herobrine would never be seen again. Trilon set Rose free and gave the Doctor's TARDIS back to him. Later on, the Doctor took this TARDIS back through time and left it in the end for the past versions of Trilon the Redeemer en route to find it in Herobrine's wrath. The armies of good dispersed, believing that all evil had been purged within the universe and that all were safe now. Trilon returned to a past version of Gallifrey to a secluded area to construct a house of his own. The Doctor, as a simple prank, then left the Mistress and Redeemer in a desert for 2 weeks, then later returned to get them so they could all visit future Trilon, 200 years after the war had ended. They arrived at Trilon's house, who was now old and feeble and on the brink of regeneration. They had just dropped in to say hello. On a side note, Trilon is on his 5th life at this time. The Doctor, Mistress, and Redeemer leave after their short visit. Later on that night, Trilon arms himself with the Sword of Never-Ending Holiness and goes to his porch, feeling something is not quite right, only to find Herobrine standing in the fields in the distance. Trilon then proceeds to chase after Herobrine into the mountains. These events brought an end to Herobrine's reckoning. On a side note, the Redeemer discovered he was a Time Lord early on within Herobrine's reckoning and regenerated, with all of his memory restored. Another side note, Trilon had also recovered all of his memories gradually throughout Herobrine's reckoning. Before I get into the Herobrine's downfall recap, I would like to say, this, by the way, this is me, real me, not scripted me. I'm just randomly saying these things because I feel like I still need to let you guys know that Herobrine's downfall is purposely, it has more detail because it is the current series that's going on. I feel like more people would want to know more about this series, the one that's going on now. So if you were going to question why there's so much more detail on the Herobrine's downfall recap, there's your answer. Now let's get on with the scripted me. Yay. Herobrine's downfall. Herobrine outruns Trilon due to Trilon having gone into regeneration for pushing his physical limit. Trilon helped a large amount of soldiers at some point in Herobrine's reckoning off-screen by healing them with his regeneration energy, causing his body to age, which is not supposed to happen with Time Lords. He is now on his 6th life. He rallies the team and calls upon his armies once again and tells them all that Herobrine has returned. Trilon has now concluded that Herobrine cannot be destroyed by physical means and must be dealt with in another way, a way that he does not know. Trilon mentions that they need better warriors and armies. He mentioned that he has discovered a parallel universe during his browsing with the TARDIS databanks a few years ago, in which the Lord of the Rings world exists as a reality. Trilon, back before the Time War, had perfected and approved upon the Doctor's parallel universe teleporter called the Quantum Multiverse Teleporter, and he had it stored as a schematic in his new TARDIS. They traveled to the realm of Middle-earth. Herobrine, now resorting to using his dark and more powerful magic that he created in the Nether before most advanced societies in the universe had even came to exist, used this magic and discovered their plan. He then established an alliance with the evils that inhabited Middle-earth, such as Mordor and the Haradrim. Herobrine approached the Dark Lord Sauron and said that he could find the One Ring for him to restore his physical form. Sauron accepted, and they established the most dangerous of any alliance that had ever existed in this particular universe. Trilon, the Doctor, the Mistress, Soundwave, and the Surgeon started recruiting armies from Gondor, Rohan, and all others that would stand against the will of Sauron and Herobrine, started building strongholds and fortresses throughout the lands that each individual country owned. Their base, Nilgavild, was in the very center of Gondor. A whole 2 years after recruiting these armies, they assaulted the cult of Herobrine and their armies that had migrated from the Nether. Trilon encountered and successfully banished the leader of the cult, Bluric, into the Void for 15,000 years. But Trilon doubted that this would hold Bluric. They moved on to the secondary leader's base, whose name was Gorbabu, but he fled and tried his best to stay far from Trilon's forces. They later discovered that the Daleks have finally returned to Herobrine's rule and have begun migrating to Middle-earth to establish their old alliance with Herobrine, the leaders of the UA. On a side note, the UA is the name for Trilon's forces, though it was never mentioned early on within Herobrine's downfall. The UA immediately ordered all armies to retreat back to Nilgavild, but leave certain patrols at the strongholds to make sure they still had stable control over their lands. Trilon commanded his armies to build a large wall to fortify Nilgavild and to improve their defenses. The Doctor has stopped going into direct battle at this point, and has started to incorporate his knowledge of warfare and weapons to improve the UA's equipment. Trilon decides that there is only one way to defeat Sauron, and this such way would be very dangerous. Trilon had then decided to create another Ring of Power to become equal in strength and power to counter Sauron. Trilon traveled to Mount Doom and forged this new Ring of Power. He binded nearly 75% of his soul into the ring. If the ring was ever to be separated from Trilon, Trilon would fall into Wraithworld and become trapped between two dimensions, not able to obtain physical form, just like Sauron. Immediately after Trilon put this ring on, Sauron appeared, took control of the ring, and transformed Trilon into an evil, malicious monster. A large figure standing nearly 8 to 9 feet tall, coated in black chainmail and armor. Sauron then renamed Trilon to Morgoth after Sauron's master. Sauron did this in order to add to Trilon's, now Morgoth's, sense of dominance over his enemies. Morgoth was then appointed to second in command of Sauron's armies. Trilon, now trapped in the monster known as Morgoth, was then being controlled by Sauron, to aid in the Dark Lord's ultimate objective of taking Middle-earth by force. The UA later discovers that Trilon has been converted into a servant of evil, serving Sauron. The surgeon then sneaks into Barad-dûr, Sauron's fortress, in order to locate Trilon after his long absence. The surgeon is captured and interrogated by Morgoth, who later leaves. The surgeon escapes after learning of Trilon's conversion and relays this news to the UA. Soon after, Morgoth finds that the surgeon has escaped, then immediately gathers his forces to lay siege upon Nilgavild. They battle for 3 days straight, but eventually the UA's forces succeed in destroying those of the orcs that did not retreat. On the last night of the battle, Daleks arrived to act as the cavalry, but they too were destroyed. The Doctor battled Morgoth and took the Sword of Never-Ending Holiness from Morgoth. But in order to do this, he had to get close to Morgoth, giving him just enough time to fatally injure the Doctor. The Doctor then hits Morgoth's axe so hard that it breaks out of his hand. He retreats. The Doctor then regenerates due to his injuries. Morgoth then returns to his fortress Barad-Gijak and installs a device into the core of his fortress to prevent any TARDISes from landing in the area. This prevents the Doctor from being able to access the fortress. During this time, Trilon is inside of Morgoth's mind, thinking of a way to take his body back. He builds up enough energy to take control of his body for a short amount of time, and uses this time to create a note for Morgoth to see. The note says that Trilon will soon take control again, then move on to dealing with Sauron and Herobrine. Later on, Herobrine compromises Morgoth by leaking information to the UA. This such information was that Morgoth has ran out of soldiers and has sent for reinforcements, rendering his defenses almost useless. On a side note, the reason Herobrine did this is simply because he enjoys anarchy and only seeks one goal, which is to rule on his own. Sauron was always oblivious to this. At this point, Trilon has established a mental connection between his siblings, the Doctor and the Mistress, and has virtually transported them into his mind. They start thinking of a way to eliminate Morgoth and return Trilon's control over his body. Trilon informs them that the only way they could possibly achieve this is to cut Morgoth's ring finger off and take the ring. Removing the ring would cause Sauron's control to fail and eliminate Morgoth. Trilon sends them back to their bodies and simply waits. Later on, Morgoth is located by the Doctor and apprehended. The explosion of energy after they remove the ring causes the ship that they were on to explode and start to crash. Trilon now has control over his body once again and escapes with the Doctor, Soundwave, and Devon, a warrior they encountered early on in the war. After they escape, Trilon then realizes the energy that was expulsed from him after the removal of the ring causes his cells to slowly die. Trilon then regenerates. During these events, Herobrine betrays Sauron and destroys his physical form, placing the One Ring in the lake that he originally found it in. Herobrine also orders the destruction of Barad-dûr in order to cover his tracks. Trilon recovers from regeneration and then is told that they have returned to their original universe, and have disbanded all forces in Middle-earth due to Herobrine doing the same. During this process, one of their friends, known as Aelin, has revealed herself to be a Time Lord, who then regenerates due to injuries that she sustained in the Battle of Nilfgaard. She then comes to be known as Cersei. Cersei and Trilon are both then informed of the events that have transpired during this time, and then move on with their plans to fight Herobrine. Trilon then learns that Herobrine has begun looking for the shards that once made up Herobrine's sword, the Sword of Darkness, and realizes that this could become an issue. The sword isn't just an intensely dangerous weapon, it is also infused with dark magic, enabling Herobrine to cause more and more destruction. Trilon then starts to go around the universe with his friends to locate the shards once again to prevent Herobrine from regaining his sword. Later on, the Doctor and Trilon visit Notch in order to discuss the current events of the war. They find that Notch's fortress, Rahu Sangar, has been abandoned after an attack issued by Herobrine destroyed the majority of the fortress. Notch had left a very important message for Trilon to find. The letter was meant to inform Trilon that he should reveal his secret to his team and start using his full power in order to become a better warrior. Watch the video called Herobrine Series Lore: The Dragonborn to learn more. Trilon later reveals his secret, simply to let his team know of his strength, but something else comes up. The Doctor feels something is off and discovers that his timeline is being tampered with. The Doctor is to travel to a planet called Silvaris. Silvaris is what is known as a rift planet to the Time Lords. Rift planets are known for their physics-defying features such as unusual land masses, time issues, and so on. Silvaris was used by the Daleks in the Time War in order to tamper with the Time Lords. Trilon and the Doctor travel to Silvaris to prevent his timeline from being altered. They discover a Dalek mothership using the power of one of Herobrine's sword shards to have an infinite source of energy. The Doctor's regeneration cycle begins to reverse. They stop this by canceling the ship's power, preventing the Daleks from tampering with his timeline. The Doctor's cycle slowly returns back to the present-day Doctor. Afterwards, Trilon and the Doctor return, having restored the Doctor to full strength. All of a sudden, Herobrine manages to break the lock shielding Trilon's TARDIS from his magic, and manages to kill Soundwave in the process. Herobrine did this to simply warn Trilon and the rest of the UA of his plans, and to put them on alert. After recovering, Trilon asks the Doctor to assist him in taking control of a large fortress in the Nether, which will prove useful once Trilon starts attacking larger targets in the Nether. The Doctor agrees to help. They arrive at this battlefield and successfully take the main fortress. They were led to believe that Herobrine would be there beforehand and were expecting him to be present, but Herobrine had escaped before they had even gotten close to storming the fortress. Cersei then arrives, informing them that they have taken the entire area. She then informs the Doctor that she must leave. Trilon and the Doctor are baffled and surprised due to her having to leave at such a sudden notice. She does not give reason for her departing, but she leaves anyway, after saying her goodbyes. Trilon and the Doctor then travel to a distant planet in deep space, which acted as a storage for their father, known only as the Teacher. The Teacher used this planet to store valuable items in order to keep them from Herobrine during the war. They obtain these items to add on to the chances that Herobrine will not get them. Trilon then finds a hidden passage in the tunnels in which the items were hidden. The tunnel led to a room that contained a shard of Herobrine's sword. They do not understand how that could have ended up there, but they take it. On their way out, a gust of dark magic causes them to see their true personalities, and how they truly are at heart. Trilon's true personality represented evil and how he once was as the Destroyer in the Time War. The Doctors represented a Dalek and reminded the Doctor of certain things that he would prefer to have forgotten. These such things were Trilon and the Doctor's greatest fears. They eventually recover and regroup with the team. They organize a funeral for Soundwave, and as the Doctor and Trilon are saying their goodbyes, the Doctor gets a signal from his sonic screwdriver. The screwdriver reveals that Soundwave's memory banks are still active. They quickly extract it and store them into the TARDIS databanks. Soundwave's mind had then been stored within Trilon's TARDIS. Trilon later created a new body for him and brought him back into the fight. Trylon then gets a signal from the island that he was stranded on along with Ted back in Herobrine's Wrath. The island had an odd magical signal, and Trylon had set his TARDIS to alert him if any activity were to occur there. Trylon travels to the island. Trylon discovers that Ted, the Redeemer, and Hunter were there. Trylon greets them, and they say that they had been looking for him. Ted and Hunter join the fight once again. The Doctor later discovers what Herobrine has been doing. Herobrine has re-established the First Order and rebuilt the Death Star. The Doctor then informs Trylon and the team of Herobrine's actions in that part of the universe. Trylon then moves the majority of his forces to this side of the universe, hoping to take the fight to Herobrine harder than ever before. The UA then goes through a series of struggles throughout the galaxy, recruiting where they can and eliminating the Nether Empire, which is now the name of Herobrine's forces, wherever and whenever they can. Trylon, the Doctor's new companion, and the Redeemer then travel to the Death Star, hoping to infiltrate their defenses. They end up having to take a well-preserved copy of the Millennium Falcon to escape, leaving their TARDISes behind. They no longer have TARDISes, and the leaders of the UA have now scattered across the universe. Trylon and the Doctor then establish an alliance with the new rebellion. The rebellion begins supplying the UA with ships and defenses throughout the galaxy. Later on, Trylon is contacted by Notch after being separated from his team after an assault on the rebel base they were inhabiting. Trylon travels to Dagobah where Notch has established a hideout. Notch begins training Trylon and teaching him new strategies. During this time, Trylon goes through a ritual known as the Trial of the Grasses from the Witcher video game series. Trylon is unconscious for 3 months after having trained with Notch for a month. Trylon luckily survives the process. Then Notch informs him of how long he had been absent. Trylon immediately leaves to find some way of repairing his hyperdrive in order to return to his team. During these 4 months, the Doctor abandoned the UA, his companion Allison was killed, and the Redeemer had been taken cactus. During these 4 months, the Doctor abandoned the UA, his companion Allison was killed, and the Redeemer had been taken cactus. During these 4 months, Herobrine had taken over the majority of the UA's control throughout the universe and had once again brought the UA to the brink of destruction. Trylon successfully restores his ship's hyperdrive, then receives a message from the Doctor. The Doctor has apprehended their TARDISes and has placed Trylons in a deserted planet near Trylon's location. Trylon then obtains his TARDIS once again. He sends a distress call out to all leaders of the UA, telling them to return to the fight as soon as possible. The Mistress returns from her side of the war in another part of the universe to help with Trylon's side of the war. Trylon then establishes the UA's presence in the universe back to normal and rallies all forces to fight. Trylon's first step to make a comeback in the war is to destroy the Death Star. The UA succeeds in destroying the Death Star and scattering Herobrine's commanding forces throughout the universe. Trylon, having crippled the Nether Empire, moves all of his forces to start taking back certain areas that were taken by the Nether Empire. At the time that this video is being made, this is currently where the story's progression is. Thank you for watching this recap, and hopefully the majority of you now understand all that is happening in the series. I hope everyone is looking forward to learning the rest of the story and seeing where the UA ends up in the next few seasons. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, or subscribe. I would very much appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Well, video at all. Goodbye.